We respectfully acknowledge that Wood Buffalo Regional Library is situated on Treaty 8 territory, the traditional lands of the Cree and Dene First Nations and Métis Nation. Hi, my name is Jessie and welcome to Book Bites, a video series brought to you by the Wood Buffalo Regional Library, where we give you a chance to see some of the hidden treasures in our collection. Did you know that Indigenous peoples in Canada have fought in every major battle Canada has been involved in? In fact, more than approximately 12,000 First Nations, Métis, and Inuit men and women volunteered for war efforts in the First World War, Second World War, Korean War, Cold War, and the war in Afghanistan. In too many cases, Indigenous peoples were repaid for their gallantry and sacrifice by coming home to systematic racism and discrimination, including being excluded from Remembrance Day commemorations. Remembrance Day and National Aboriginal Veterans Day, which is on November 8th, are times to reflect and acknowledge the freedoms we enjoy in Canada that were defended by our brave veterans in decades past. Today, I'd like to show you some titles from our Bouchier Indigenous Cultural Corner that honor Indigenous veterans. Our first book is Remembrances, Métis Veterans, by the Gabriel Dumont Institute of Native Studies and Applied Research. During the First World War, the Second World War, and the Korean War, Métis people from across Canada enlisted in the military in large numbers. However, after returning from the war, their stories were largely suppressed or forgotten. In the mid-1980s, the Gabriel Dumont Institute began the Métis Veteran Book Project by interviewing veterans throughout the province of Saskatchewan. The project turned into this book, which has first-hand accounts of Métis enlistees and their time training, combat, and in enemy-present camps. Unfortunately, most of the veterans have since passed on, but their stories live on in this anthology, which was nominated for a 1997 Saskatchewan Book Award. Our next title is The Biography, From the Tundra to the Trenches, by Eddie Witautuk. This gripping account of Inuk veteran Eddie Witautuk follows his life story beginning with his early life in James Bay to his adoption of the name Eddie Vital as an effort to evade federal restrictions on Inuit movement so he could enlist in the Canadian forces. This brought him to the front lines of the Korean War, where he experienced battles along with equality and respect, while never forgetting his true identity as an Inuk. In 1967, he left the army and returned to James Bay in order to reconnect with his true self, to act as a role model for young Inuit men and women, and to educate non-Inuit peoples about the common bonds among all Canadians. Let's look at an account of Indigenous peoples in the First World War with our next title, For King and Canada, Canadian Indians in the First World War, by Timothy C. Weingard. In this nonfiction title, Weingard gives a comprehensive look into the experiences of Indigenous peoples who enlisted to fight for the Crown during the Great War. His book also focuses on the discriminatory government policies that shaped their participation in the early years of the war. At first, the Canadian government banned Indigenous peoples from enlisting in the war with the belief that they were unsuited to civilized modern warfare. But in 1915, Britain intervened and demanded that Canada actively recruit Indigenous peoples. Weingard details how these new administrative policies affected their experiences at home, on the battlefield, and as returning veterans. Are you looking to introduce Indigenous war heroes to your children? Then our next title, Meet Tom Longboat, by Elizabeth MacLeod, may be for you. In this biography, MacLeod introduces Tom Longboat, the world-famous Onondaga athlete, by detailing his long list of accomplishments, including the 1907 Boston Marathon race, where he persevered through sleet and snow to win. This race catapulted him into the spotlight as a long-distance runner and brought him the competition he needed to become the world professional marathon champion. In 1914, when World War I broke out, Longboat wanted to do his part, so he gave up his athletic career to enlist. McLeod details his experiences as a message carrier in the 107th Pioneer Battalion, a group of soldiers made up of mostly young Indigenous men. Longboat lived life on his own terms, and his legacy and incredible accomplishments continue to inspire today. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Book Bites. National Aboriginal Veterans Day and Remembrance Day are coming up quickly, so let's be sure to take a moment on these days to reflect on the sacrifices that were made for our freedoms.